Hi, everyone. I'm Annika Brink. As Mariana mentioned, the National Housing Trust is dedicated to preserving and improving existing affordable housing so that low-income families can live in quality neighborhoods with access to opportunity. We are unique in that we engage in advocacy, real estate development, and lending. NHT started as a policy shop a little more than 25 years ago and found that we were providing more and more technical assistance to folks looking to preserve affordable housing. And we started diversifying into these other areas of real estate development and lending. And Josh will talk a little bit more about real estate development and lending further on. And I'm going to start off talking about advocacy. But we really come to our energy efficiency work from the perspective of ensuring that affordable housing is sustainable and affordable, and looking at energy efficiency as a tool for preservation of existing housing stock. So to that end, the Trust has been engaging with utilities and other stakeholders over the past few years to look at how utility funding can be leveraged to serve these goals, and just really working with a broad range of stakeholders in this area. So advocacy. I'd like to set the stage for what we see as coming opportunities in the utility space. Utility costs present the best opportunity to reduce operating expenses and sustain affordable housing. As you can see, these blue bars here represent utility expenses, which are in master meter properties the #1 expense that owners are facing, and in individually metered properties, the #2 expense. And of the expenses up here, which are utilities, salaries and personnel, contract services, and taxes, utilities are really the one that owners have the most control over. I'm sure you guys are all aware. So we're seeing that housing funding is not growing at a time when utility funding is projected to grow. In fact, it's projected to triple from $7 billion to, I'm sorry, it's projected to grow from $7 billion in 2011 to $16 billion in 2025. And thanks to ACEEE for this lovely slide, and my next one, which you'll also recognize. And another thing, there are a lot of things driving this growth in utility funding, one of them being state requirements for energy efficiency spending or savings, meeting savings goals, another with EPA carbon pollution standards, and energy efficiency being an option for utilities to meet those goals. Utilities are going to look for new places to invest their money as existing opportunities are drying up. So we really think that they'll be moving into multifamily, are encouraging them to move into multifamily, and to some extent this is already happening. And we really don't see it as an either or for single family and multifamily. We really think it's a yes and. Utilities need to find these savings somewhere. So this is another version of the slide that Lauren presented earlier. And this is just showing that utilities have not been serving the multifamily market generally, or are just starting to do so. In each instance on this slide, the bars should be touching the line graph, and we can see that they don't, which means that there's really room for more investment in the multifamily space. At the same time that this is happening, state housing finance agencies are increasing energy efficiency requirements for the housing going through their funding programs. As you can see, this is showing the number of states that encourage properties to incorporate energy efficiency measures. So that ranges from specifying energy efficient products to having insulation standards, requiring or giving incentives for Energy Star appliances, efficient HVAC, et cetera. So this kind of all is just to set the stage for the project that I'm working on, which is the Energy Efficiency for All project, which is a project NHT is undertaking in partnership with NRDC, the Energy Foundation, Elevate Energy, and New Ecology, with the goal to create more energy savings and healthier communities for all through more effective energy efficiency programs in affordable multifamily housing. So in pursuing this, and we're working in several states, we're really pursuing a network approach. We think that one of the main ways that we're going to achieve these goals is to strengthen the linkages between energy and housing communities, as well as with utilities, regulators, and the State Housing Finance Agency. And we've had some successes so far, which I'll go over later. We're looking to increase funding for multifamily programs to improve the program design, and while we're advocating for bigger, better programs, to also make sure that demand is there from multifamily owners, that they understand the value proposition, and that there are tools available for them to be able to invest in their properties and participate in these programs. So similar to how Lauren was laying out, I really think there's a huge role for community advocates to make sure that the sector, multifamily sector, is served, and to position yourselves as experts who are connected to these different stakeholder groups in your communities. So we have done some preliminary gathering of best practices and features of well-designed programs for multifamily affordable housing. And I have 2 slides on this. I'm just going to go through these really briefly. The first is that program features are tailored to multifamily housing. A lot of programs right now are just direct install, and there's a lot of space to move to targeting whole building savings. To simplify income eligibility, this might mean coordinating with weatherization assistance program income eligibility guidelines. It might mean coordinating with the State Housing Finance Agency guidelines. I think there's a lot of opportunity to knit programs together and to simplify what in a lot of cases is really onerous paperwork that folks are doing to determine income eligibility in multifamily properties, and utilities are just starting to grapple with this, and I think a lot of times don't realize the strain on multifamily owners in participating in their programs as designed now. Also, as mentioned earlier, makes a lot of sense to target owners preparing for major events at points when they are able to dedicate resources to energy efficiency upgrades. That might mean purchase or sale of a property, refinancing, or replacing major equipment. And then also, programs should support benchmarking and make energy consumption information easily available. There are a few tools that are really targeted to the multifamily sector that I would encourage you to take a look at. The 2 that spring to mind for me are WeGoWise and Energy Scorecards that really take the multifamily sector into account. There's also Portfolio Manager and probably some other tools that I don't know about. Other features of well-designed programs, including financing options that work for building owners, which I'm not going to go into because other folks have and will. Working with lenders to deliver incentives in connection with those major events. And then working with local or regional lenders for smaller projects. You know, not forgetting that there are folks like CDFIs that are really mission-driven or other local lenders. On marketing and coordination, the one-stop model, what we see a lot with utility programs, and we're trying to encourage a paradigm shift, is that the common spaces are eligible for commercial programs, the tenant spaces are eligible for the residential program. The owner has to apply to both those programs, once for electric, once for gas, and it really, after you factor in all the transaction costs, it's kind of a why bother factor. So really encouraging utilities to hide the complexity of their funding streams behind an easy interface. The Chicago program by Elevate Energy follows that model, and it's certainly it's not magic. It is hand-holding. It is care and attention, and really making sure that owners are not having to become experts on energy efficiency just to participate in a utility program. Work with the State Housing Finance Agency to coordinate programs, and then develop partnerships with local entities. And then I'll just end with 2 slides on positive news from the field. So some preliminary results of partnerships we've had in a few states. So in Pennsylvania, the POC changed its policies to make it more attractive for utilities to address multifamily housing. That's led to the creation of new programs. Utilities in Minnesota created the first ever low-income multifamily programs in the state. And what I think is interesting here is utilities were having a hard time with the participation eligibility, having to, go door to door, asking owners to do that, and local stakeholders there were able to work with the Department of Commerce, who regulates utilities, to issue guidance that says, hey, if the building has one of these 3 funding streams, it's eligible for the program. End of story, which is hugely helpful, and I think a great model to follow. In Maryland, the State Housing Finance Agency is actually administering the program, $20 million in utility funding, and really weaving together different funding streams. Rhode Island also streamlined programs. And then we have dialogues going in several states right now, but specifically in Minnesota and Missouri, just want to highlight their extremely broad and diverse ranges of stakeholders. Lots of people at the table giving input, and I think there's nothing to stop these types of dialogues from developing in every state, and really weaving together the networks that are sometimes really distinct but shouldn't be, and getting the housing and energy worlds together to inform each other's view and find more solutions and get utility money into this sector. So that's my last slide.
Thank you, Annika. So I'm Josh. I run our lending program at NHT, and I'm going to jump around a little bit, tell you a little bit about who we are, how we got into this kind of lending, a little bit about our third arm, the real estate development, and use that as a way to talk about how we are looking at these kinds of projects. I do need to, I told Mariana from the start the bad news, and I tell everyone the bad news, which is we haven't actually made one of the energy loan. We've made lots of loans. I am indeed a real lender, but not some of these loans, and we'll get into that in a minute. So to start, NHTCDF, the National Housing Trust Community Development Fund, is the lending arm of the National Housing Trust. We're a certified CDFI, a flexible source of financing that we consider ourselves patient capital. We have generally provided the early funding needed to make affordable housing preservation projects go through. But it's everything we do is really about ensuring the privately owned rental housing remains the nation's affordable housing stock and is sustainable over time, and that's where energy efficiency starts to come into play. And so the way that our loans have always been made is that we make very risky, small, early loans to projects that are often unsecured, that allow developers to pay for architecture work, environmental reports, sometimes for some acquisition, that allows them to then put together the financing they need for to actually make projects go forward. And so in that vein, the way we originally started looking at energy efficiency was we thought we would give incentives through our pre-development lending to let real estate developers include more energy efficient design measures into their projects. What we learned, though, was that it wasn't really the cost of the design that was expensive. It was actually figuring out how to finance the actual the measures and the improvements, and decided, we realized that because of this sort of strange lending we've always done, it was a great, we're well positioned to keep going on that because this lending, as everybody's been telling you, is not easy. And there are a lot of challenges. Some of them have been covered. I'll go through quickly some of them that we realized as we were started looking at this. And so there's the classic split incentive problem of, the owner's going to pay, but if tenants are paying utilities, then that they're not, the person who's paying isn't benefiting. In affordable housing, there's an additional, sometimes split incentive problem, which is that some HUD programs, depending on how they're set up, when it's the payment from HUD to the owner is based on budget. And so what you see happen sometimes is that if the owner said, oh, I'm going to put money into energy efficiency, their payment for utilities is based on how much their utilities cost. And so when they go back to HUD and say, well, where it used to be $65 per unit per month, now it's $50, HUD is just going to change that payment from $65 to $50, and that clearly causes an incentive problem. These deals are often also quite complicated. You have tax credit deals and Section 8 and other subsidies. You use usually what we call soft money too, where cities or state agencies have provided money that maybe is only required to be paid if there's cash flow, but if there isn't cash flow, then then they don't have to be paid. And so this creates a problem again when you're reducing costs, because we can provide a loan to try and do this work, but if what it means is that somebody else who is already in line to get paid is getting paid, then as a lender, we're not that excited to see that we aren't going to be paying. Additionally, with low-income tenants, there was mentioned a little bit about whether when a project's not master metered, some of the risk that lenders are looking at and trying to figure out, and I think that's a big general question, is how do we get confident with that the savings projections are going to be realized? That becomes a much bigger challenge when you're talking about putting this risk on low-income tenants, because you want to reduce their energy costs, obviously, but if for some reason you're adding tariffs or loan repayments that end up, and the savings end up not being realized, it's a much bigger challenge for a low-income tenant than it would be for an owner or other folks. Like I said, there's just general performance risk of wondering whether savings are going to be realized. When it comes to security, that's, as I said, one of the reasons we feel like we can make these loans is that we've been comfortable taking a more holistic approach to underwriting and looking project by project and saying, are we going to get repaid? But a lot of lenders are worried about making a loan that doesn't have any actual real estate collateral. And so that becomes, you start to say, well, if there's 3 or 4 layers of loans that are taking up more than the value of the property, that can be a risk. This question.
On the previous slide, when you're mentioning the tenant-related performance risk, even if you took risk out of it, how do you actually legally enforce that on the tenants, unless you're waiting until they re-sign their lease, that they would have to pay that $20 fee or whatever the fee is per month?
I don't have a good answer. I think there are possibilities of, OnBill starts to talk about that. OnBill has its own challenges of wondering whether at some point, what happens if people don't pay their OnBill, or they only pay the amount that's due for energy but not for the tariff.
I mean more so the landlord, theoretically, or whoever the building owner is agreeing to the energy upgrade. They're agreeing to apply a fee on a tenant's bill. How does that actually work in practice? Because the tenant themselves aren't agreeing to pay it.
So I've had a few conversations about this, specifically with low-income advocates, and I think they are quite concerned about it, and that there need to be some productive conversations with them. I think that a lot of the concern is around the possibility of shutoff, and that low-income advocates are a lot more comfortable with the idea of a tariff being on a tenant's bill if shut off of utilities is not a penalty for non-payment. But I think in general, you would actually have to get a signed waiver from every tenant or build it into the original lease agreement. So I think that's generally how that's handled, is that there's some sort of signed document.
Yeah, and I think, the other thing, and that's sort of where this performance risk question comes into, which is ultimately the goal is to save the tenants money. And so, if you can get people to agree to it if they're going to be saving money, as long as, but then this question, the challenge for us is how do we know if they're actually going to save that money that they are supposed to? And then, I think I've covered most of the rest of that. So what we are doing, and we are underwriting loans. It's not that we are not doing any of this work. We haven't actually deployed the funds yet. So what we said was, we're going to take a more holistic approach to doing this. Is there cash flow already on the project that we can use to service the loan? Are there other guarantees available? Maybe working with energy contracting groups who are going to guarantee the energy. Maybe maybe the owner is a strong organization with a strong balance sheet that just doesn't have the cash to deploy. And is this a developer that's done thousands of units, or is this a one-time developer? Can we secure the loan against the property? Who's doing this energy work? How confident can we be in the audit and the construction? And how much of the savings do we need? And that sort of falls into cash flow, but not necessarily the same thing. So I'm going to take a quick jump to our real estate development arm, the National Housing Trust Enterprise Preservation Corporation, who's developed 6,000 affordable homes in 11 states and the District of Columbia, and they're really taking, again, everything we do, we're trying to sort of incorporate all aspects of what we can into our work. And so, they're acquiring and rehabbing buildings. Everything we do is we don't do any new construction. They are focusing on making sure they stay affordable for as long as possible. We're providing different kinds of resident services to help our residents improve their financial position in their lives, and then also really making sure that we're doing as much sustainable and substantial sustainable renovation as possible. So a couple of quick examples of what we've done. Sometimes they're relatively small. There's a property here in DC on our street where water was just being used at an extremely intense degree, and so it cost $10,000 to save $27,000 of energy costs a year. Payback was 6 months, and it's made a big difference for. Again, this is all ultimately leads to more sustainable properties. That means affordable homes for longer, and then obviously everything else that Casey listed in terms of what the reason we want to do this also applies. And then another one with the Channel Square, which is also in DC, where they've added low-flow shower heads and faucet aerators, a new central plant with new pumps, much more efficient lighting, and then also gas. They're making sure Washington Gas Energy Services supply 100% renewable wind energy to the property. But I wanted to look at Channel Square just to this isn't, they're financing as part of a larger refinancing, but I thought it'd be a good example to use is how I would look at one of these properties. And so this is all the work that's being done, about $744,000 of improvements, and over a simple payback of 8.9 years. And the question is, well, how do we come up with $744,000? And we are looking at making loans, long-term loans. That's one of the things that we realized as we got into this is that you can't. CDFIs generally have had pretty short-term capital of their own, and we needed longer-term capital, and we are slowly finding it. And so, using the kinds of utility incentives that everyone's talked about today, there are ways to piece together a deal where, so in one option, what we might do is say, all right, the projected savings are $83,000. We're going to assume discounted savings of 15%, which gives you $71,000 of additional cash every year, which covers $560,000 loan that's fully amortizing over 10 years. That gives us that gives extra cash, which allows an owner to say, you know what, for $84,000, when I combine this with utility funds, it actually makes a lot of sense to do this. And so they can put in $84,000 and get $12,000 a year in addition to paying off the debt. Some owners are going to be less likely to want to do these kinds of things, and it really just depends on what kind of incentives exist. The more incentives that exist, the easier it is to piece together a deal. And also, to be quite honest, one of the things that we look at is, is this building our program? We want to both. We certainly want to make sure that we are helping these kinds of projects along, but we also want to build up our own program for the future. So, there are ways, if we can find, for example, utility funds that can be used for loan loss reserves, which give us flexibility to say, all right, well, we can take the projected savings at what they're actually projecting, because the first $120,000 of loss, we wouldn't be covered if we would be covered if for some reason they're not realized, and that would allow us to make a riskier loan of $655,000. And the nice thing about this kind of loan loss reserve is that, assuming this all goes well, then we can use them and keep going with this program. Now, the final challenge, even if we get beyond all of these, the sort of financing structural challenges, and we have a product that works, is this idea of a one-stop shop. And everybody's Elevate's program in Chicago has been great, and that, I think, that one of the things that showed was just how important it is to have a singular group walking everyone through from the energy audit through financing, implementation through operations and maintenance. Now, I should mention, I think it's important to know that a lot of the challenges I laid out to financing don't exist in Chicago. Chicago's got a relatively unique affordable housing market where the properties tend to be market rate affordable. And so most of the projects that were part of Energy Savers, the Elevate program, had just simple first mortgages that it was easy to then just add a second mortgage. Often the lender, the CDFI lender, was the holder of the first mortgage, and so it made it quite simple. But so that's why some of the other programs across the country are taking longer than we'd like. The nice thing about being able to look at the Elevate program is both the one-stop shop and then also the fact that we know that these savings can be realized. It's not, I think that's a huge, in affordable housing, this can make a difference. And so, knowing who's attending the OS conference, I think, there is really a major opportunity to be an implementer and find groups like ours who are financing, and we will finance all over the country. And if we know that there are people who can, like I think Lauren said, hold the hand from the beginning to the end, then it makes our job as financiers a lot easier.